I feel like there's two welcome to the SEC moments. Because the SEC, it's not so much about being at your best against the top teams. That's understandable. Like if you
Sure.
don't show up and play well against Georgia, you don't show up and play well against Alabama, you don't show up and play well against Oklahoma, like you're going to have your hands full. But to me, it's the next tier game that is challenging. So I look at the game against Oklahoma, then you have to follow it with a home game against the Georgia Bulldogs, a team that's won two championships in a row. Like that to me is the welcome to the SEC moment. And then the other one is you get Florida. That'll be a physical game. We don't know how good Florida will be. We don't know how good Florida will be at that point of the season. Then you follow it up by going to Fayetteville, where it's like one after. It's like, all right, well, we survived Florida. That was not a good performance. Now we got to go to Fayetteville and take on a team. This is their Super Bowl, and they've had it circled all year. So, what jumped out to you when looking at the Texas schedule?
Some of the things that you brought up, Greg, but maybe in a little bit of a different way. You talk about a very smooth landing into the SEC for the Texas Longhorns. And the first thing that I think of for teams that haven't really been a part of it, maybe fans that don't know it the way that you and I do, growing up with it, playing in it, being around it, now covering it, is just kind of like what you said there. Some of what most people would consider the mid-tier teams, what those venues are like. Fayetteville, Starkville, Columbia, South
Yeah.
Carolina. Everybody knows Baton Rouge is nuts. Everybody knows when Florida's rolling, you go play in the swamp, you're not going to hear anything. Tennessee, when you go to Rocky Top and they're winning, there's literally not a place louder, maybe on planet Earth, as far as a sporting venue is concerned. But they're going to get indoctrinated into the SEC on November the 16th, in my opinion, because it won't happen at Vanderbilt, especially now that they're still going to be doing renovations. That thing's not going to be ready to go, and it's probably not going to be super loud anyway. So you really don't get a full taste of it. Yes, from a physical standpoint, the games you brought up, but you don't really dip your toe into it until November the 16th. And like you said, Florida team, logo, big game. Even if Florida is a 4-win team, it doesn't matter. It's the Florida Gators, and it's the first time they've met as conference opponents. That will be big. And then you'll go to Fayetteville, a place where a lot of those young men probably haven't really heard that it's a tough place to go play or it's that physical. First off, on November the 16th, it's not going to be comfortable weather-wise. It was miserable, I feel like, when we went in September. It didn't matter. But you go there in the middle of November, it's not going to be it's not going to be a comfortable place to play. It's going to be cold. It's probably going to be a little bit rainy. That grass is going to be dead, so it's not going to be a lot of cushion when you get tackled. And they're going to, whoa, pig, suey. And they're going to see that giant hog when they come run out of the tunnel. I can remember the first time I went, I was like, what is happening in this place? This is nuts. And it's a lot bigger and a lot louder and a lot nicer than I went there. And then the other thing, Greg, is following those up, you get a very physical Kentucky football team. Doesn't matter how good they are. You know, like I know, Mark Stoops' team's going to beat you up before you have to play that first one back at Texas A&M. So that close to the schedule. There's one other that's a little bit more difficult and a little more daunting, but that's what stuck out to me is they are going to have a nice landing into the league by not really having to play at a difficult new venue until November the 16th. But that close to the season is going to be brutal.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. And I'll say this, like I called the last Texas and Oklahoma game in Fayetteville, and it was hostile.
Yep.
I mean, it was nuts. I mean, they hate Texas. They hate Texas. And in this league, like people love to hate more than they love to love. Like you and we've talked about that before. Like Arkansas hates Texas as much as Texas A&M hates Texas. And so they're going to bring their best stuff. And I'll say this too. You mentioned November 16th. I called LSU at Arkansas in 2022.
Yep.
That was the day that Jaden Daniels and LSU, that high-flying offensive attack, scored like 10 points. And the game was won by LSU's defense that day. So I know
that was
a
Harold
long
Perkins
time
kind of
ago.
coming out party, right?
Harold Perkins had like 4 sacks.
Yeah.
So like it was a miserable day to play offense. Miserable. So you're 100% right there. Mid-November, not an easy place to play by any stretch of the imagination. Let's move over to Oklahoma for a minute. I feel like it's somewhat manageable early, right? First 4 games are at home. Then, hey, in comes Tennessee. You can gradually ramp it up. Houston will give you a little bit of a test, comparable with what they've seen the last couple of years. I don't think Houston, I think Willie Fritz will do a great job. I don't know what they're going to have next year, but I think that first test will be Tennessee. And then their welcome to the SEC moment is the next week. You get Tennessee, great, congratulations. Now you got to go to Jordan-Hare.
Yep.
And you got to go play at Auburn, a place like you described. And like everyone knows at this point, it's no secret anymore. Auburn's an impossible place to play. It's very, very difficult. So that's the tough spot for me where I'm circling it for Oklahoma. It's like, all right, you might get Tennessee at home, but man, when you go to Auburn, you better be ready to rip.
And the only good news there, you'll have the week off before you play in the Red River rivalry game the next week in Dallas against Texas. But yes, I agree. You get the first 4 at home, then you go to Jordan-Hare Stadium. You've told me, I've had other SEC quarterbacks tell me, Aaron Murray has mentioned it, Trevor Knight has mentioned that it's the toughest place they played. And it's not always just because of the noise. It's just there's something about that environment that's different. And that's one, again, that's probably not at the top of most people's list where they would say, oh, man, we got to go there. Or, oh, wow, it's going to be tough to go play there. But then when you get there and you see it and you live it, you understand what it's all about. And that'll happen early. And I feel like we're going to say this about almost every team. That November, yes, you started off with Maine and you have a week off, but still at Missouri, at LSU, and Alabama at home in November. And here's the thing. We probably should start over really quick because you asked first thing I thought of when I saw this. The first thing I thought of, Greg, when I went through all these schedules and I started looking at it, I said to myself, I don't think we're going to get a single person that's going to be back saying, why didn't they go to 9 conference games? Because there's not one of these schedules you look at and say, oh, man, they're good. They're going to be fine. Don't worry about it. I mean, Georgia's schedule is like, whoa, Nelly. I mean, Florida is like, you can't be serious. And no one's going to look at any of these schedules and say, yeah, if they were at 9, it'd be tough, but I think they're going to be good. They're all unbelievable. And some of that is what they've done in the non-conference as well. But all these schedules are tough, and the close is the last month of the season for a lot of these teams is going to be brutal. You get Alabama at home, and then you have to go to Death Valley to close out your first season in the SEC.
Yeah.
Oh, that one's going to be a lot of fun.
No, that one, I think their final 3 games are probably as tough as anybody because I think Mizzou's going to be really good next year. Granted, a few things they might have to figure out, a couple pieces that need to be replaced for sure. Cody Schrader being maybe the most obvious example, a guy that probably could have made a strong case for the Doak Walker if he didn't win it. Ollie Gordon ended up winning it, but he was as good as anybody. That offensive line, you would know better than I do. How do they retool up there? But at Missouri, team that's going to finish more than likely in the top 10 to 12, depending on how the bowl game goes against Ohio State. You got Bama to them, and you got LSU on the road. I mean, 2 really difficult road trips. Missouri's going to be really cold. We know that as well. They're in November. So I think that final stretch for Oklahoma is rough. I mean, and 2, that's going to be the biggest difference, I think, for Texas and Oklahoma. Now, I think Texas, this year's roster, I don't know what next year's roster is going to look like, but I think the attrition that they might experience is going to be at a whole nother level than what they've experienced up to this point. No disrespect to the Big 12 at all. I have a ton of respect for the league, love the league, but it's a little bit more wide open. It's a little bit more spread out. The SEC is not really built that way. It's really, all the teams, all the best teams are built from the inside out.